Greetings, YouTubers. How's it going out there in YouTube land? Hopefully everything's going pretty good for you. We are going to be dropping out the transmission now. In my last video, I showed you how to take off the subframe out of this, and we are going to be now continuing on from there, and we're going to go ahead and prep the transmission and get ready to drop it out. Now, one thing you'll have to have a way to support this engine. You can either block it from underneath, or you can use something like this. This is something I got from Harbor Freight about 4 years ago. It's called an engine support bar, and this here you can use on a lot of vehicles. I don't remember how wide this is, but you can go on their website and probably get all the dimensions. I'm going to be using this to support part of this engine. What you can do also is, if you have some 2x4s, you could probably make something like this, run it across here, and make some kind of a contraption like this where it sets up on the inner fenders. And you can see this one here just barely sits in there. And like I said, this was used for a Ford Taurus. I believe the Ford Taurus was a 2004 or 5. This body width, I believe, is the same width. So I lucked out, and this is what I'm going to be using to support this engine when we go ahead and pull the transmission. Now, one other thing here is you have two motor mounts. If you saw my last video, you watched it. We took the bottom motor mount off. Real easy to get to. The very last step that we'll probably do in this process of taking this transmission out, there is a motor transmission mount right there. I think you can kind of see it there. That's still hooked up, and we got one over here that is still hooked up. That's what's keeping the engine and the transmission in there safely right now. Now let's go underneath real quick here. And as you can see, I've got the transmission pan off. I've got all the transmission fluid drained out of it, kind of letting it sit for a few hours. And everything else is pretty much ready to go. I got the subframe off. You can see the axles there. Should pop right out. And also I've got my rack and pinion back there. I got it all wired up and everything. So everything's looking really good. And let's see, there is the bottom of the engine. Now, like I said, if you can get something, if you have a lot of blocks of wood or some jacks or something, it would probably work for you if you don't want to mess around with an engine support. But if you do this, make sure you do it safely and make sure the engine is secured nicely, because you don't want it pivoting down too much and ripping hoses or breaking anything else. And here is the look at the bottom of this transmission when everything is unhooked. And actually, the bell housing is probably bigger than the whole transmission. Well, maybe half of it. I'm actually going to pull this transmission out, rip it apart. I want to see what's wrong with it. The transmission will run, but when it goes to third to fourth gear, it just goes into neutral, and there's a real hard shift from first to second sometimes. And I got a P0757. It kept saying that this shift solenoid was bad. A B shift solenoid was bad, so I switched A and B around, and still had the same problem. So I know it's an internal issue. But so having said all that, we got everything down here prepped. We got all the stuff down here ready to go, and all we have to do now is start taking some stuff off on the top. So having said all that, hopefully this will explain a lot. And if you want to take this subframe off, I would suggest to do this over a couple days. Kind of prepare yourself mentally, because it's a lot of work, but it can be done. Like I said, this is a really nice car, and I want to fix it. Okay, so back up on top here. I'm not going to worry about where we're going to actually bolt this to the engine yet, because we got to take all this stuff out of the way, and there may be several options here for me to actually get some bolts in the block and hook these chains up and kind of hold that engine up a little bit. But in the meantime, what we've got to do, we've got to unhook a bunch of stuff here. We've got to get this air cleaner out of the way. If you take this battery tray out here, this will give you a lot of instant access to bolts down in there. If you get your hand up under here, it's really tight, but I usually take these out anyway, because it'll let you get down in here and see a lot of stuff that might be still connected to the transmission and that you would otherwise miss when you're pulling it out. Alright, so I've already talked enough. I'm going to try to keep this video a little shorter. What we're going to do here is go ahead and start unhooking some stuff and start prepping this transmission and get it out. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get some of the stuff unhooked. I'm going to hold the camera free-handed here, and I'll try not to shake it too much because I don't have a lot of room here to set up a tripod. But hey, you got to do what you got to do, right? And we'll go ahead and get some stuff here unhooked. We got a wire here on this air cleaner that we got to get off, and we got to get this air cleaner housing here off. Now, there's a couple of hoses up on top here. Be careful. I find a lot of times these things are pretty difficult to get off. So if you are having trouble getting these off, get you a pair of pliers gently grip these hoses and spin them and pull, and they usually come right off. And I got to take this one hose right here off. We got to squeeze this with a pair of pliers, and this whole thing we can just kind of move it out of the way. Let's get the air cleaner here. This thing here is kind of annoying, by the way. It won't stay, but we get the air cleaner out and get this piece out. Some of this stuff's already loose, so I wanted to keep the video, like I said, a little shorter. And now we can go ahead and get this thing here out of the way. All right. I don't know what they had on this hose, but it must have been super glue. That thing fought me. All right, so we got that out of the way, and we'll kind of tuck this hose back in here for now. And now we're already getting a lot of room here, which is nice. I think the next thing we'll do is go ahead and take this battery tray out of the way. This out of the way here. Alright, so there those are, two 10mm bolts. Okay, some of this stuff you don't have to do, but I'm going to do some of these wires. I'm going to move them out of the way. These come off pretty easy, and you can see this one just pulls apart. This one here has a little clip down here, a little interesting little clip. You just unhook it, and this here will allow me to tuck this back up under the engine. Kind of like this. It's the little things, you know. If you can get a lot of things out of your way, where you don't have to get kind of frustrated, it makes the job a lot easier. So we got that out of the way. All right, the next thing I want to do is go ahead and pull this EGR tube out of the way. Thankfully, it comes off pretty easy. And this has already given us a lot more room here because we have to access into our bell housing bolts down here in the bottom. So getting all this stuff out of the way, and now I'm just going to take these wires here, the battery wire, and kind of push it down out of the way for now. Okay, on the top of the transmission, we've got a couple of doohickeys we got to take off. I believe this is a noise suppressor for the radio or something, not sure. And it's these little things that you take your time at if you don't break them. And you remember where they go back on. It makes the job just so much nicer when you get everything back together and it runs perfect. And by the way, there are a lot of these cars, these Ford Fusions from 08 all the way up to 2013 on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist for sale, really cheap. If you can get one that's got a nice body and good interior, you can have yourself a really nice running car. By the way, this here is just a antifreeze hose, engine hose. Don't mess with that. It'll be okay. We'll just kind of pull it out of the way. And I always like to take my bolts and put them right back in the block. That way we know where they are, because we all lose bolts, right? So we'll take this one, get this out of the way here. And we got this one more ground right here. And by the way, the one we just took off here, there's actually two wires or two ground. There's a ground, and this goes on the back of this noise suppressor right here. So don't forget that. And now we'll go ahead and take off the second one here. This is a starter ground, I believe. So we'll get this out of the way. Let me set this back out here. Okay, there is that. We'll push this out of the way. Actually, it's a pretty small ground for a starter wire, but that's where it goes, down to the starter. Okay, so those are in there. We know where those are. We won't be losing those. And next thing you can do is get you a little wire, and let's pull this hose up out of the way, because this will make it easier when we get into our bell housing bolts. We don't want this stuff hanging down in our way, making us annoying, and you'll be cursing because it's getting late. And you'll be pulling stuff out of the way, so we'll kind of tie this around something up here and get it out of the way. There we go. See, that took what, 1 minute? So that's nice. We got that out of the way, and I think you can kind of see the top of the transmission there, and the bell housing bolts are really easy to get to there. Okay, so we got a couple plugs here we got to unplug. If you look closely, right about there on the top of the transmission, we got one right here. We just unhook, And we got this one right here. And these can be a little fickle to get off. Sometimes you have to use a screwdriver. Push on the tab in the back and take your screwdriver and help push it off a little bit. Trust me, I've broken a lot of these clips in the past when they're like hard and dry rotted and from the heat. Alright, so we got that out of the way. And by the way, when you're unhooking a lot of these clips, you're going to have to keep moving this cable around, battery cable. Now if you want, you can disconnect it right here, unscrew this and wrap this back around the fuse box and pull this back out of the way. And I'm actually go ahead and do that. It'll only take a second. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to move this booger out of the way. And when you're doing this job, take lots of pictures and shoot some video. That way when you put things back together, you'll know exactly where it should go. Alright, put my little nut back on here. Now we'll just move this back out of the way. We don't have to worry about this no more. So there was that. And now all we gotta do is pull this back out of the way like this. We can actually take a bungee cord later and pull it back when we're ready to be done with it. Okay, right here we're looking at the top of the transmission still, and we've got a plug here we've got to take off. Alright, pull that out of the way, and we got one down here on the bottom. I think you can kind of see that. We tilt down a little bit. Sometimes these come off pretty easy and sometimes they don't, and we got a second one here which I pulled it off with it. And so there we go, got that out of the way. And now all we got to do is go ahead and unhook our big guy right here. This is our gear shifter selector. But before we do that, let's go ahead and just move this transmission line out of the way. It's actually kind of annoyingly in the way, not a big deal, but we'll just pull it off anyway since we've got to. And you're going to lose a little fluid, probably not enough to worry about. And now got that out of the way, and boy, we've got a lot of room down here now. All this stuff now moved out of the way, and now we'll go ahead and take that shifter off. Alright, I think you can kind of see that still. Alright, these clips sometimes are fun. You got to take a screwdriver and pry up on both sides and slide this out of the bracket right there. And now I got to go underneath and then pop that. Okay, now we got that loose. Now I want to save you some grief. Do yourself a favor. If you do not know how these guys here come off, these little clips, I've seen guys break these by the dozens. And there's a trick. You got to push this tab in, slide this back and forth, and you do it a certain way. This will allow this to come off. Now, if you can't figure it out, do yourself a favor. Just get you a socket. This is an 18. Take the nut off on the bracket down on the side transmission. Just pull this whole thing off. Get it out where you can look at it and figure it out and pop this off, and this will make you a lot happier, because if you break this, you pretty much have to go get another bracket for this cable. This is like all one piece here, I believe. It's been a while since I dealt with this, but I didn't want to fool with it, so I just unhooked it from the bracket. Besides, the transmission's coming out anyway, so just so you know, if you don't know how to do this, maybe go online and look how other people do this and take this off of this. So just so you know. Now if you look here, we have a little bracket. If you want, just take this bracket out. Those wires, those sensors are connected to this, and this will just make it a little bit easier to get this transmission out. You don't have to worry about all this stuff in your way. And not only that, you can pull this clear. You can pull this clear out of your way, and you won't have to deal with it. And there we go. And we'll just let this hang down all the way. And you can see we got all this other room back here. And now we've got one more plug on the bottom that we have to take off, and it's actually right here. We're going to push on that little tab. You could probably go underneath and get this one also. And there we go, got that out of the way. And we almost got every wire disconnected from this transmission. I'm going to go ahead and stick my bolts back in here so I don't lose them. like I said, I'm going to rebuild this transmission. Unless I find something really badly wrong with it and I can't rebuild it, it's toast. If I have to get another one, we still have all these parts here, bolts and nuts. I'll know exactly where to look for them. Okay. And by the way, here is the nut and the lock washer that goes on that bracket there, the gear shifter. And you can kind of see where it goes. So we'll just go ahead and put the nut and the washer back on, so we'll know where this is. Now this is probably going to be a little rust if you decide to take yours off. Take your small hammer and tap it, put some oil on it, and put a little screwdriver in behind it, and this will eventually come off. And now don't forget your other transmission line. Get this off. A little clip right here. And these could be on there, so you gotta have a little patience with those also. You gotta pull a lot and yank until they eventually come off. Okay, now since we did all that, I wanted to show you, I got the camera off the tripod, and I wanted to give you a look under here real quick. And now you can see where all the bolts are, all the bell housing bolts, and all that. It just makes it a little bit easier to get in here and take these out. Of course, we still gotta take the starter out, which is right about there. The bolt-on type starter. We'll take that off here in a few minutes, but everything is going pretty good. And now I guess we'll go ahead and move on to the next step. Okay, now the next thing we can go ahead and do is take the starter off. Now there is 2 bolts that hold that starter on, and I've already got one of them started there. There's one. That is a 13 millimeter. You gotta stick your hand down there and get you a deep well socket. Put that on there, and that will take that one off. And we got one right there that's pretty easy to get to. And once we take those 2 bolts out, we can pull that starter completely out. You don't have to take any other wires off. There is one little tiny wire, I believe, in the back, so let me see real quick. We'll go ahead and pull it out a little bit. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get my hand down there and go ahead and get this top one out. Okay, there's just enough room to do this. There is one of them. And you can see it's a fairly long bolt. And now we'll go ahead and finish taking the bottom one off. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to take off. Now, like I said, I think there's a little wire on the back. I know there's a big wire, hot wire, bolted to the back of the solenoid, but I'm not sure if there's a small one on it. There should be, but when you pull this out like this, just slowly pull it out with your hand like this, and as it comes off, look on the back and see if there's anything else connected to it, and there's one little wire right there. And let me zoom in real quick for you. And there it is. It is a solenoid wire, so I think a little 8 millimeter nut holds that on, so we'll go ahead and take that off. I stand corrected. It is a 10 millimeter nut that holds that on. I know you can't see it there, it's kind of hard to see, but there we go. And there is the back of the starter. There's the nut. And now we can just pull the starter up out of here and just lay it off to the side. Okay, and there's a quick look at the starter in case you ever have to change yours on the 2.3. There's the back of the solenoid. There's the hot wire nut right there, and you can see I left the wire on there. And here's a look at the front of it. Kind of a clamshell bolt-on type, which is kind of interesting. It is a little easier to get this off. And there's a hot and a ground wire, and we'll just kind of put that off to the side. And now you can see right about there, kind of see some of those teeth there. Now, the reason we had to take this off is we got to get it there and take off the torque converter bolt. Okay, we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. We got this wiring harness right here, this little blue plug. Just pull it off of the little harness right here, off of the clip. The harness off the clip, you see it's part of the transmission. Kind of move it out of the way. And on the back here, we have this transmission dipstick tube. There's a little 1/4 inch bolt in the back we have to take off. And once we take that off, we can go ahead and kind of pull it up out of the way. And I think you can kind of see that. There's the little bolt right there. Right there. Get that out of the way. That is basically all of the sensors on top of the transmission. Now we have one on the bottom that we have to take off. Okay, on the bottom of the transmission here we have one more sensor we have to take out, and this is a 10 millimeter little nut, I believe. And do yourself a favor, just take the whole sensor out. You can unplug it if you want, but there's a chance you could hit the sensor when you're pulling the transmission out and perhaps bust it. And sometimes this will save you some grief. I do believe this is a speed sensor. Get this out. And this is our very last sensor on the transmission that we have to deal with. Get this out. May take a little wiggling. There we go. And pull it out of the way. I'm just going to simply move it back out of the way. We can use it a little bit later. And that is the last sensor. Now regarding the dipstick, it actually goes right about up here where my finger is. I might go ahead and leave it in for now, but if you want, if you wiggle it enough and turn it, it should pull out of the case down here on the bottom. But we'll deal with that a little bit later. Now while you're under here, do yourself a favor. You can use paint or whatever. I'm using some fingernail polish. There is a place cut in the transmission case right here. If you look closely, you can see the flywheel, and you can actually see part of the converter. Go ahead and mark that right there, because some of these bolts are offset on some of these vehicles, and you can end up having a hard time lining the bolts into the torque converter through the flywheel. So go ahead and mark that right there, and you can see I've got some good paint on it. It's already dried nice and hard, and this will give me a nice reference when I go to put this back together. I can see this and know that everything's kind of back together, and hopefully I'll be able to get those torque converter bolts back together into the flywheel. And now we'll go ahead and get our dipstick out, and I've already got this unhooked on the bottom, this little tube, no big deal. If you wiggle this enough, it should pull right out. And out it comes. And we'll just kind of put this off to the side. Here's a nice look at it. Like I said, it just kind of sits down in there. And check your O-ring, make sure it's okay. And now we can move on to the next step. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and take out the axle on the passenger side. Before we do that, we've got to unbolt the carrier housing, which is right about here where my hand is. And this is a, looks like a 13mm socket that will take care of that. There are two bolts up there we have to break loose. Just like that. And there is our bolt. And we'll put that off the side, and now we'll grab a hammer and we are going to tap the axle out of the transmission real quick. Lift up on it just a little bit, and out it comes, just like that. I like it when a plan comes together. And now we'll go ahead and take out the driver's side axle. It's usually pretty easy to come out also, but just take a screwdriver and come up behind the axle like this right here, and take a hammer and tap it a little bit. And it usually pops right out. These axles aren't really difficult to take out. And you can see there it comes. And there we are. And there is that axle. And there's our axle. I actually had to unhook my bungee cord because I had this line here kind of pulled up, and it was caught between the line and this little bottom of the shock. So I dropped this line down just enough to get the axle to come out around the bottom of the strut there, around that. So that is out, and I'm happy about that. Okay, everyone's wondering, when's he going to show us how to get this torque converter bolts off? We don't understand how to do it. Well, what you got to do once you get the starter off, you get your finger back here. There's really no room to get that bolt, but what you got to do, there is a plug right here. Pull this thing out. It's a big old plug that kind of takes up a lot of space, just like this. And that will give you lots of room to get this torque converter bolt out, which is actually right there where my finger is. And let me get a mirror. And if you look closely, you can kind of see the one torque converter bolt. I'll have to shine the light a little bit better for you. I think you can see there is where the other torque converter bolt is. So we got to go ahead and take this out. Now to take this out, I'm going to lay on my back and put my hand up in there with a socket. And before we do that, right there's where the starter is, where the bolt holes are. There is a little sensor right here. Go ahead and hook this wire. It'll just make it a little bit easier to get your hand up in here when we're getting ready to take those bolts off. And now we're ready to go ahead and pull those torque converter bolts off. And now get you a 13/16 socket and a little ratchet, you know, and put it on the crank. And you can easily reach over here and turn this and rotate that engine and get to each bolt as you're taking them out. So this is really helpful here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is go underneath and put my socket and my ratchet on that 15mm bolt. And if my theory is right, as I'm turning that, the torque converter will turn to a point until that ratchet hits the top of the case, and it will stop it, and that'll give me enough leverage to go ahead and take that bolt out. So let's give it a try here. Alright, so here we go. Okay, it worked. And here comes the bolt. Sometimes you get lucky and it works, and sometimes, well, you just got to keep trying it until it works. And out it comes. And here is a look at it. So it's actually a nut that is on there. So now we got to do all 4 of those. Just take your time at it, and it will come out. And make sure you have exactly a 15mm socket, because anything else in there, you'll have a chance of rounding those bolts off, these nuts off, and you'll be in a pickle. It's really crappy way to do this, but it's the only way to get these off through the starter. So since you know that, I'm going to go ahead and get all 4 of them off and come back here and show you how it went. One. Go for it. Okay. And there you go, my friend. That is the very last one. I had to verify if there was 3 or 4. Some of these models only have 3 torque converter nuts, but this one has 4. And my friend, we are ready to go ahead and unbolt this bad boy, drop it out of here, and grab my transmission jack. Of course, you have a transmission jack, right? You can get those for $100 easily these days. Like I said earlier, with this here, man, it makes it so much easier. I just reach over and turn it. I don't even have to get up or anything, and it really helps to spin that flywheel. Okay, on the top of the transmission, let's go ahead and take our 14mm bolts out. There are 4 of them. I've already loosened these up to make your life a little bit better and faster. Take all those out. And just remember the longest one, which comes out down here, this goes near the starter. So don't forget that one. That one goes down here. This is the longest one of the 4. Now, as we lay on our back and look up under here, there's a transmission bolt right here on the bottom. We'll leave that one in. And also there is one right here. We'll leave that one in for now. And on the back side of the transmission, we have 2 bolts which are right up here. One is up a little high above the exhaust. Pull this one out. And this one here is a pretty long one, so that one goes up on top. Don't forget where that one goes. And we got one right here. And that is it. And also, while you're down here, do one more thing. Go ahead and put your oil pan on the transmission. That way, when we put our transmission jack under this, we will not damage our solenoids or any of our wires. And simply do one more visual inspection. Make sure you got all the wires out of the way and everything looks like it's going to be unhooked. And we are pretty much done down here for now. Just one quick side note. Look how big this catalytic converter is on this 4-cylinder. That is a humongous catalytic converter. This thing puts out not very many emissions at all. It is a low emission vehicle, so a huge catalytic converter. And it's okay. It runs pretty good. Okay, at this point, you can go ahead and figure out how you want to block the engine a little bit. Boy, this here was challenging because on these engines, they don't give you anything to really bolt into where you can tie a chain or anything. So what I had to do was run a chain all the way down on the outside of this plastic plenum, make sure I didn't break anything there sticking out. And I got it on a bolt down there where the starter used to be. I think you can kind of see that there. And then I've got my chain, secondary little chain, back here where the engine actually is supported by the factory right there. There is a hook right there, I think you can kind of see. The chain goes through there, then I have it right here with one of these adjustable links. And that's how I've got the chain kind of around that. And that's the only thing I could do, but it is supporting it right now. I've got the transmission jack underneath of it, also holding it up a little bit. And when you do this, just be careful. If you see anything sticking out that you might break, go another route. But this was the only option I had, so it might be good to have a floor transmission jack big enough to lift the engine up a little bit. But you're still going to need a secondary transmission jack to lower the transmission. So you just got to figure out what's best for you. All right, so there are 3 18mm nuts here we have to take off on top of this motor mount. And really, the only other 2 bolts we have to take off is on the bottom of that transmission down there, and they are those little 14s. And this transmission is pretty much ready to come out. And these bolts here, when I lower the transmission down, these bolts will slide right down through the motor mount, and I should have enough clearance to go ahead and drop this transmission out. Alright, so we'll go ahead and take our last transmission bolts out. These are 14, and I find these come off usually pretty easy. And there it is. Now don't be surprised if your transmission and your engine starts to come apart a little bit, because these last 2 bolts is the only thing that's really holding it in. And by the way, there is my transmission jack. I picked this up for like $120, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and it's been a lifesaver. Everybody in the neighborhood knows I have this. They're always asking to borrow it. So we got that up under the transmission. Now we'll start lowering everything and separating the transmission. And as you can see, we are starting to lower it. It's coming loose from the transmission there, and I'm going to slowly let this down. You can kind of watch it as it drops down a little bit more. You can see we made some nice progress. We got the transmission down about 3 inches now. Okay, the transmission is slowly coming out. I've got it dropped down about 4 or 5 inches, but we got one more bolt here we got to take out. It's on the inside of this transmission housing, and that's the last bolt. Now we can go ahead and finish separating it. It's actually coming out pretty easy. You can see the big gap there. It's coming out pretty nicely. And down comes the transmission. It's out. And there's a look at it. It's all separated. It came right apart, no problem whatsoever. Just don't forget about this inner bolt on the inside of the housing. And we're done. So all I gotta do is pull the jack out. I'll have to slide it down off the jack because I don't have my vehicle up quite high like I wanted to have it. And you can kind of see the transmission sitting on this jack. I actually put that wooden piece there on it. It makes it a lot more stable for the transmission. They don't slide off on the metal. And look up on top here and look, and you can see it's all separated. Came out pretty nicely. So these will work if you get the bolts in the right place and the chains in the right place, because there's actually a motor mount still connected there. So the chain now is just basically holding the back of the engine, which is not really all that heavy. So let's go ahead and pull this out. There it is. Give you a look at it. So there's a nice look at it as we spin it around. And this is the original transmission that was in the vehicle, and I got it out without breaking anything, and no cuts. That's why I wear gloves. Now if you have someone to help you, this job's not that bad for two people, but with one person you really got to take your time at it and plan. And all my sensors are connected and all that, so I'm probably going to end up rebuilding this, take it apart and just fix what's wrong with it. Or if I can find somebody that's got a really good deal on transmission, then I'll, if they can guarantee it, then might go that route. But I'm not sure yet. And I know the pump's okay because it had no problem going into gear and driving. It's just some of the gears were kind of messed up in it. And no leaks whatsoever. And here's a look at the transmission. Where it bolts to the engine. Not much there. So that's it, guys. So thanks for watching. My suggestion is if you're going to do this, make sure you have a way to hold that engine up, because if you lower the engine down about 4, 5, 6 inches, it will clear the frame right here. And if I look right here, show you real quick, you got all this room to take it out if you get your vehicle up in the air high enough like I've got. So that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. Until my next video, subscribe and like and all that. And if this helps you out, give me a thumbs up. Until my next video, I'll see you guys later.